Right, everybody. This is going to be a a complementary complementary practice video to the knee muscles. I mentioned with you guys in the email that because of the hurricane coming, my father's, who was visiting my sister in West Virginia, his flight got canceled into New Orleans and moved to Houston. And so I had to go pick him up from the airport, which I don't mind because he's my father and I love him. So that put me in a pinch for you guys. I usually like to do all of my lectures brand new, but I had to get a lecture to you guys tomorrow morning, so I used a knee lecture that I did this summer um, so that you guys could stay up with the information. And then on my drive back, I was like, well, you know, I want to, if that's the first time you got introduced to the knee, I don't want to change it up. Not that I'm going to change the muscles, but maybe I use an analogy that I didn't use. And so long story short, I'm going to keep that lecture grounded for this semester. So that is your knee muscle lecture. And then I'm going to complement it with some practice questions, okay? All right. So in addition to the knee, I'm going to do an ankle, a subtalar joint, and then a knee muscle for flexors and extensors. So remember, 415 helps you to identify muscle function. 310 helps you to identify what muscles are working because you understand why they're working. So this exercise, you have gravity pulling down on this part, but you have the ground pushing up at the ground, ground pushing on here, they're pushing on there, pushing up at the toes. So you have this, what we call a force couple action happening. But the point is that all of the forces are trying to dorsiflex you here. So you need your plantar flexors to make you plantar flex through concentric work, to keep you plantar flex through isometric work if you want to hold this position, or to use eccentric work to allow you to dorsiflex in the presence of something that's already trying to dorsiflex you. Your circles don't tell you who's working. Your circles helps you identify who are the plantar flexors once you identify what group is working, in this case, your plantar flexors. So after you identify, hey, I need plantar flexors here, then your circles could say, well, who are those posterior muscles that pull in the direction of plantar flexion? Tibialis posterior, flexor hallucis longus, flexor digitorum longus, soleus gracilis, proneus longus, proneus brevis. As you could visualize how they sit in class, right? And then another thing I emphasized is the gastrocnemius being put on slack here, right? So with the knees flexed, the gastrocnemius gets put on slack. Therefore, if you take something that's stretchy, you shorten it on one end, it pulls less on the other end. So it's not that the gastrocnemius doesn't help. It's not that it doesn't pull. It's just that it loses some of its stretchy pull. So it doesn't pull as much. So for the same weight, imagine if you were doing this exercise with your knees extended versus the same weight with your knees flexed. Well, if the contribution to the gastrocnemius goes down because of the stretchy stuff is pulling less, well, then something has to take up that slack. That's where that kind of concept comes from. So other plantar flexors are going to take up that slack, do a little bit more. Okay. Plantar flexors. Let me go pull up another one. Okay, the arrow shows motion, but the external force is actually trying to move you in the other direction, right? So what group of muscles, I hate being tethered. That means I'm connected. That means my microphone is connected to the computer. So anytime I move my arm, I'm pulling on cables. So what group of muscles do I need to do a job? Well, before I see who needs to do a job, I'm going to figure out why they need to do a job. Who do I need because of why do I need them? The TheraBand is trying to evert the subtalar joint. So I need the inverters. Look, there's my tibialis anterior. This is an inverter. So I need my inverters. Who are my inverters? And again, this is a great lesson. Even though this is a left foot, I can still use my right circle because my circles didn't tell me who I need. 310 told me who I need. Once I establish that I need inverters, then I can go to my right-sided circle and say, who are my medial crossing subtalar joint muscles? Tibialis anterior, extensor hallucis longus, and then the other inside muscles, right? Tibialis anterior, extensor hallucis longus, tibialis posterior, flexor digitorum, and flexor hallucis. The medial crossing muscles, okay? And again, those are the inverters, not because of what they're doing, it's because of their direction of pull. Those same muscles are going to cause inversion in this exercise through concentric work by pulling in the same direction as maintaining this position through isometric work, and by pulling in the same direction as allowing eversion through eccentric work. It's the direction of pull. Inverters are called inverters not because they cause inversion. I could have inversion because of everters through eccentric work. It's not the motion. We don't associate muscles with motion, we associate muscles with direction of pull. And then contraction is what influences motion if that muscle is doing a job, right? Okay, so on the test, I might just pick one muscle. I might pick two muscles and play flip-flop. I might say tibialis anterior and extensor digitorum, tibialis anterior and extensor hallucis, tibialis anterior and peroneus longus. You know, I might play flippy-floppy. Okay. Establish what group is working, then your circles help you to see who's in that group. Next. All right, so this one we're going to do on your own. I'm going to ask you questions, and then you can pause it, try to answer it, and then come back, okay? This exercise, so there's the cushion. The little padding is pushing on her shin from the front. So you got to establish what group of muscles she would be working from her perspective. And then once you establish that group of muscles at the knee, then you could use your circles to answer who are those muscles or how many of those muscles. On the test, I might say how many muscles, significant muscles that you're accountable for in your test, how many are working this exercise? And I might say 4, I might say 7, I might say 1, I might say, you know, just random numbers. Okay. Or I might say, identify one of the muscles that's working in this exercise. And I might say rectus femoris, and on the answer sheet, I might have biceps femoris. So again, gotta know. So when you come back, press pause, come back. Welcome back. External force is trying to flex her knees. So she needs knee extensors to play tug of war against that external force in this exercise. What are the knee extensors? The knee extensors are the muscles that pull in the direction of extension. You know, if she's not moving here, in other words, if you say the knee extensors produce extension, if that's how you memorize it, if that's how you learned it, that's not true. If she's just holding this position, there's no extension happening, but yet some muscles are doing a job. They're doing a job by not allowing any motion. In fact, I've told you guys this before, that the ironic thing about it is that muscles only produce motion in the direction they pull a third of the time. 2/3 of the time, you're either going to have no motion a third of the time or motion in the opposite direction of their pull another third of the time, eccentric, isometric. So to say that the quad is a knee, its function is knee extension is wrong 2/3 of the time. I can't stress that enough. If I had hair, I'd pull it out. It's only right a third of the time. So what does a quad do? It pulls in the direction of knee extension. That happens 100% of the time. When you're at rest, pulls that way. When you're dead, pulls that way. When you're concentrically working, pull that way. Eccentrically working, pulls that way. Isometrically working, pulls that way. Again, at rest, pulls that way. It always pulls in the direction of knee extension. Understanding contraction and work helps us understand how it can influence motion through that contraction, through that work. Okay? So I need my knee extensors in this exercise. Vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, vastus intermedius, rectus femoris. My circles help me to identify those muscles up in there. Okay. So if the quads are needed, who's not needed? In other words, if my knee extensors are my agonist, who is my antagonist? Okay, that would be my knee flexors. We don't just say hamstrings because the hamstrings are only 3 of the 7 muscles. So it's not that you're wrong by saying the hamstrings if you're, doing certain exercises. It's just that the other muscles get erased from memory if you never talk about them. It's one reason why in 310 I emphasize why we don't say bicep and tricep. It's not that it's necessarily wrong. It's just that there's other muscles that help. And if you never talk about them, then they get lost to history, like in Coco, the movie Coco, where you die 2 deaths. One is where you physically die, and the other is when your memory is gone from the world. Then you vanish from the world. So if all we ever do is just talk about biceps and triceps, then the anconeus and brachialis and brachioradialis and pronator teres and these other muscles get lost to history. So that's why my verbiage tries to protect all of those muscles. We say the elbow flexors, knowing that the bicep doesn't work by itself. We say the elbow flexors, knowing that it's a group of muscles doing a job, and then we can say, well, the bicep is part of that group, but there's also these other muscles in the group. Okay. Knee extensors. Now notice how similar this exercise is in terms of your body position. So someone who's not well versed in understanding kinesiology, theoretical kinesiology, understanding forces and motions and muscles, would say, well, it's the same exercise as the one before because you're in the same position and your joints are doing the same thing. That's true. You're in the same position and your knees are going to flex and extend. Okay. But what we do understand is now the padding isn't pushing on the front of the shins, the padding is pushing on the back. And because the padding is pushing on the back, it's not trying to flex her knees, the padding is trying to extend her knees. And because this external force is trying to extend her knees, she actually needs her knee flexors to work against it. They're going to work concentrically to make the flexion happen. They're going to work isometrically to hold this position. And those knee flexors are going to work eccentrically to allow the extension. So again, the only thing consistent is that those muscles pull in the direction of knee flexion. That's the only thing that is consistent. The motion isn't consistent. Extension, flexion, extension, flexion. The only thing that's consistent is the muscles that you are working and their direction of pull. So again, think about it, guys. I've said this a billion times, but it's so important and so easily confused. It's a crime, not really, but in kinesiology, to say that the knee flexors, the hamstrings, 3 of the main 7, their function is knee flexion. It's a crime. It's a travesty. Because I only flex half the time. So what happens is that you get this bad verbiage. And it imprints in your mind. Anytime I see knee flexion, it must be the hamstrings. Because if you learn function based on motion, then Pavlov's dog, you ring in the bell and you're salivating, and if you say hamstrings, flexion, semimembranosus, semitendinosus, biceps femoris, flexion, hamstrings, flexion, hamstrings, flexion. I don't care what class you might have heard that in. I don't care what book you heard that in. Think. If all you hear is hamstrings, flexion, anytime you see flexion, your mind is going to trigger hamstrings. And we just did the leg extension machine, right? Well, guess what? Half the time you have flexion. So your Pavlov is like, oh, there's flexion, must be hamstrings. Oh, there's this extension, must be quads. Oh, there's flexion, must be hamstrings. Oh, there's extension, must be quads. No. You're working knee flexors the entire time, not because of motion, but because of the direction of pull. Because the direction of pull. They pull in the direction of flexion. Flexion pullers. Remember that? I taught you guys, if you're having a trouble figuring out the whole flexion, it's not that it causes the motion, it's that it pulls that way. And flexion pullers can prevent the legs from extending. And flexion pullers can create flexion through concentric work in this exercise. And flexion pullers can allow extension through eccentric contraction in this exercise. Pullers, flexion pullers, not flexion the motion, but the flexion of pull. Super important. Okay? Flexion pullers. So now that you've identified that you need knee flexors, pullers of flexion, who are they? That's when you think about your circle. Well, they're all posterior crossing knee muscles. Who sits in the back? Have fun. Sartorius, gracilis, popliteus, gastrocnemius, semimembranosus, semitendinosus, biceps femoris. Okay? And so again, if all you ever do is say hamstrings, 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 semimembranosus, tendinosus, biceps femoris, if all you ever do is respect those three, then eventually you're going to disrespect the others and you're going to forget about their function. You know, imagine if you're a clinician, you need to know the function of all these major muscles, because what if there's a, you know, what if there's a strain to a knee flexor that's not a hamstring? You got to know what those muscles do. Okay, you got to remember their function. Okay, let's do a quick stretch example. Move out the way. Doing this time. So her right hip is flexed. So as she flexes, she's going to shorten hip flexors. She's going to lengthen hip extensors, right? So the same concept for the knee. As you flex the knee, you're going to stretch knee extensors. And as you extend the knee, you're going to stretch knee flexors. As you dorsiflex the ankle, you're going to stretch plantar flexors. As you plantar flex the ankle, you're going to stretch dorsiflexors. As you invert, you stretch everters. As you evert, you stretch inverters. Easy peasy, right? All right, so I hope this helps. Remember, function is directional pull. Super important. Talk to you later.